October 15th, 1967. Oakwood Heights, Pennsylvania. The autumn wind carved through the narrow streets of Oakwood Heights like a blade, rattling the storm windows of the modest two-story homes that lined Maple Grove Avenue. At 6:47 p.m., the skeletal branches of century-old oak trees cast dancing shadows across the pavement, their leaves spiraling down in amber and crimson torrents that seemed to whisper secrets to anyone who dared to listen. Inside the white colonial house at 1247 Maple Grove, the Hartwell family was settling down for what would become the most infamous dinner in the town's history. The aroma of Eleanor Hartwell's famous pot roast filled the warm kitchen, mixing with the scent of fresh-baked cornbread and the subtle perfume of the chrysanthemums she'd arranged in a mason jar centerpiece that morning. Eleanor, a woman of 34 with kind hazel eyes and auburn hair always pinned back in a neat chignon, hummed softly as she placed the final serving dishes on the table. Her movements were precise, methodical, the same routine she'd followed every Sunday evening since marrying Raymond 12 years ago. The good china inherited from her grandmother caught the light from the overhead fixture, casting tiny rainbows across the cream-colored tablecloth. "Dinner time," Eleanor called toward the living room, where the familiar sounds of the CBS Evening News drifted through the archway. Walter Cronkite's authoritative voice was reporting on the escalating situation in Vietnam, his words creating a stark contrast to the domestic tranquility of the Hartwell home. Raymond Hartwell, 36, emerged from behind his copy of the Oakwood Heights Gazette, his wire-rimmed glasses slightly askew from where he'd been rubbing his tired eyes. As the town's only certified public accountant, October meant long days and longer nights as local businesses prepared their quarterly reports. His salt and pepper hair, prematurely gray from years of stress and responsibility, was disheveled from running his fingers through it, a nervous habit Eleanor had learned to find endearing rather than irritating. "Smells wonderful as always, darling," Raymond said, kissing his wife's cheek as he passed. The gesture was automatic, comfortable, the kind of unconscious affection that develops in marriages that have weathered both storms and sunny days. From upstairs came the thunderous sound of feet racing down the steps, and moments later, 15-year-old Vivian bounded into the kitchen. Her honey-blonde hair, so different from her parents' darker shades, flew behind her like a banner, and her blue eyes sparkled with the infectious energy that seemed to radiate from every pore of her teenage body. She wore a purple paisley dress, her favorite, despite Eleanor's frequent observations that it was becoming too short, and white go-go boots that she'd begged for until her parents finally relented the previous Christmas. "Sorry I'm late, Mom," Vivian said breathlessly, sliding into her usual chair across from her younger brother's empty seat. "Jennifer called about the homecoming dance, and you know how she gets when she's excited about something." Eleanor smiled, adjusting the napkin beside Vivian's plate. "Speaking of being late, where's your brother?" "Timothy," she called toward the stairs. "Dinner." The response came as a series of thuds and crashes from the second floor, followed by the rapid descent of 11-year-old Timothy Hartwell. Unlike his sister's graceful energy, Timothy moved through the world like a small tornado, leaving a trail of displaced objects and fond exasperation in his wake. His cowlick stood at attention despite Eleanor's morning attempts to tame it, and his freckled face bore the evidence of an afternoon spent exploring the woods behind their house, a smudge of dirt on his left cheek and a small scratch near his right ear. "I was reading," Timothy announced, as if this explained both his tardiness and his disheveled appearance. In his hand he clutched a worn paperback copy of the Hardy Boys' The Tower Treasure, the corners soft from repeated reading. "Mystery novels again," Raymond observed with gentle amusement as his son took his place at the table. "Maybe you should consider becoming a detective when you grow up." Timothy's eyes lit up. "Could I really, Dad? Mrs. Patterson says detectives need to be really smart and observe everything around them. I have been practicing. Did you know that Mrs. Henderson next door got a new car? It's blue and she parks it exactly 3 inches farther from the curb than her old one." "That's very observant," Eleanor said, ladling pot roast onto each plate. But right now, let's observe how delicious this dinner is going to be. The family settled into their familiar rhythm. Raymond discussed his day at the office, carefully avoiding the more tedious details that he knew would glaze over his children's eyes. Eleanor shared neighborhood gossip, Miss Chan's prize-winning roses, the Kowalski family's new baby, the ongoing saga of whether the city council would approve the proposed traffic light at Oaken, Maine. Vivian regaled them with high school drama that seemed monumentally important to her 15-year-old sensibilities. The homecoming dance was 3 weeks away, and she was convinced that Tommy Richardson was going to ask her. She'd been dropping hints for weeks, she explained, though she was careful not to be too obvious about it because that would be mortifying. Timothy, meanwhile, was far more interested in sharing his theories about the strange lights he'd seen in the Millfield forest the previous night. They weren't flashlights, he insisted, his fork paused halfway to his mouth. Flashlights don't move like that, all floaty and weird, and they were different colors, blue and white, and sometimes orange. Probably just some teenagers with lanterns, Raymond suggested reasonably. You know how sound and light can play tricks on you at night. But Dad, no buts about it, Eleanor interjected gently. You have enough real mysteries in those books of yours without inventing new ones in our backyard. The conversation continued, weaving through the comfortable topics that had sustained thousands of family dinners before this one. Outside, the wind continued its relentless assault on the autumn landscape, and the first drops of what would become a significant rainstorm began to spatter against the kitchen window. At exactly 7:23 p.m., according to the brass clock on the mantelpiece in the adjoining dining room, Eleanor excused herself to fetch the apple pie she'd baked that afternoon. It was Raymond's favorite, made with Granny Smith apples from the orchard just outside town, and a secret ingredient, a pinch of cardamom that she'd learned from her own mother. Who wants ice cream with their pie? She asked, her voice carrying from the kitchen as she moved between the refrigerator and the counter. Me, came the chorus from Timothy and Vivian, while Raymond simply raised his hand with a smile. Eleanor was scooping vanilla ice cream into small bowls when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong in their quiet Sunday evening. It started as a low humming, almost like the refrigerator motor, but deeper, more resonant. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, vibrating through the walls and floorboards with an intensity that made the dishes in the china cabinet rattle softly. Ray, Eleanor called, a note of uncertainty creeping into her voice. Do you hear that? From the dining room came no response. Raymond? She called again, louder this time. The humming sound was growing stronger, and now it was accompanied by something else, a smell that was both familiar and completely wrong. It was ozone sharp, like the air before a thunderstorm, but mixed with something metallic and chemical. Eleanor set down the ice cream scoop and walked to the archway between the kitchen and dining room. The sight that greeted her would be burned into her memory for the rest of her life, though that time would prove to be shorter than anyone could have imagined. The dining room was empty, not just empty of people, empty of any sign that people had been there moments before. The plates that had held the remains of pot roast and vegetables were gone. The silverware, the glasses half filled with milk and water, the napkins that had been placed beside each setting, all of it had vanished as completely as if it had never existed. Even more disturbing, the chairs were pushed in neatly against the table, as if no one had been sitting in them. The tablecloth showed no wrinkles, no indentations from elbows or silverware. It was as pristine as it had been that morning when Eleanor had first spread it across the table. Raymond, Eleanor screamed, her voice cracking with terror. Vivian, Timothy. The humming sound was everywhere now, seeming to emanate from the walls themselves. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced and writhed like living things. Eleanor ran through the house, checking every room, calling their names until her voice was raw. In the living room, Raymond's newspaper lay folded neatly on his reading chair, as if he'd never opened it. Upstairs, Vivian's room showed no signs of the hurried preparation for dinner. Her makeup was arranged perfectly on her vanity, her bed made with military precision. Timothy's room was equally undisturbed, his Hardy Boys collection arranged in perfect alphabetical order on his bookshelf. It was as if her family had been carefully erased from existence, leaving behind only the ghost of their presence and Eleanor's increasingly frantic screams. The neighbors found her 20 minutes later, when her cries finally penetrated the sound of the storm that had begun in earnest. Mrs. Henderson was the first to arrive, followed quickly by Dr. Brennan from 3 houses down, and then what seemed like half the neighborhood, all drawn by the sound of a woman's terror cutting through the wind and rain. Police Chief Walter Kowalski arrived at 8:15 p.m., his rain slicker dripping puddles onto Eleanor's spotless hardwood floor. He was a good man, methodical and thorough, but nothing in his 22 years of law enforcement had prepared him for what he found at 24/7 Maple Grove Avenue. Eleanor sat in her living room chair, wrapped in a blanket that Mrs. Henderson had brought from upstairs, staring at nothing. Her hair had come loose from its careful chignon, and she clutched a dish towel in her hands, the only thing she'd been holding when her world tilted sideways into madness. "Mrs. Hartwell," Chief Kowalski said gently, settling his considerable bulk into the chair across from her. "I need you to tell me exactly what happened. Take your time." Eleanor's voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "We were having dinner, pot roast. It was 7:23. I remember looking at the clock when I went to get the pie. I was in the kitchen, scooping ice cream, and I heard this sound, this humming, and then she looked up at him with eyes that had seen something no one should ever have to see. They were gone, all of them, just gone." Chief Kowalski took notes, asking the questions he'd been trained to ask. When had she last seen them? Had there been any arguments, any signs of distress? Had Raymond seemed worried about anything at work? Did Vivian have any problems at school? Was Timothy upset about anything? To each question, Eleanor could only shake her head. Everything had been normal. Everything had been perfect. Until it wasn't. The initial investigation was swift and thorough. Chief Kowalski called in help from the county sheriff's department, and by midnight, 25th and Maple Grove was crawling with investigators. They dusted for fingerprints, took photographs, collected samples of everything they could think of to collect. What they found defied explanation. There were no signs of struggle, no indication that anyone had been in the house except the Hartwell family. The front and back doors were locked from the inside. Eleanor had to unlock the front door to let the neighbors in. The windows were all closed and locked, their screens intact and undisturbed. Most puzzling of all were the complete absence of any evidence that Raymond, Vivian, and Timothy had been in the dining room that evening. The investigators found Eleanor's fingerprints on everything in the kitchen, on the dishes she'd been washing, on the pie plate and ice cream scoop. But in the dining room there was nothing. No fingerprints on the chairs, no fabric fibers, no hair strands, no saliva on glasses or crumbs on plates. It was as if 3 people had simply ceased to exist in the middle of dinner. The search expanded to include the entire neighborhood, then the surrounding woods, then a 50-mile radius around Oakwood Heights. Volunteers combed through Millfield Forest with flashlights and search dogs. Divers explored the bottom of Hartwell Lake, named coincidentally for a family that had settled in the area 2 generations before Raymond's ancestors arrived. Local newspapers picked up the story within days. "Family vanishes during dinner," read the headline in the Oakwood Heights Gazette. "Mystery deepens in Hartwell disappearance," followed in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Soon reporters from as far away as New York and Chicago were descending on the small town, turning Eleanor's tragedy into a media sensation. The theories were endless and increasingly bizarre. Some suggested that Raymond had killed his family and hidden the bodies, though investigators could find no evidence of violence and no motive. Others proposed that the family had staged their own disappearance, though Eleanor's genuine terror and the lack of any preparation made this seem impossible. The more sensational theories involved everything from government experiments to UFO abductions. Timothy's mention of strange lights in the forest the night before was seized upon by ufologists as evidence of extraterrestrial involvement. The unusual humming sound Eleanor described was compared to reports from other alleged alien encounters. Dr. Marcus Holloway, a psychiatrist brought in from Pittsburgh to evaluate Eleanor's mental state, spent hours trying to understand what she had experienced. He was particularly interested in the smell she described: ozone and metal, and something chemical. Stress can play tricks on memory, he explained to Chief Kowalski after his third session with Eleanor. Trauma can cause people to remember things differently than they actually happened. But Mrs. Hartwell's account is remarkably consistent. Every detail, every timestamp, every sensory memory remains exactly the same each time she tells it. Either she's an extraordinarily accomplished liar, or something genuinely unexplainable happened in that house. As weeks turned to months, the investigation began to wind down. The FBI had been called in and found nothing. Private investigators hired by Eleanor's sister from Philadelphia had turned up no new leads. Psychics, amateur detectives, and conspiracy theorists continued to visit Oakwood Heights, but their wild theories only added to Eleanor's pain. Eleanor herself began to withdraw from the world. She kept the house exactly as it had been the night her family disappeared, as if maintaining the physical space might somehow bring them back. Neighbors brought casseroles and offered comfort, but Eleanor seemed to exist in a bubble of grief and bewilderment that no one could penetrate. The case officially went cold in the spring of 1968. Chief Kowalski retired 2 years later, carrying the weight of the unsolved mystery with him. He would spend the rest of his life wondering what had happened to Raymond, Vivian, and Timothy Hartwell, and whether there was something he had missed, some clue that might have led to answers. Eleanor lived in the house on Maple Grove Avenue for another 15 years, growing more reclusive with each passing season. She died in 1983, taking whatever secrets she might have possessed to her grave. The house sat empty for several years before being sold to a family from Ohio who knew nothing of its history. For decades, the Hartwell disappearance became one of those stories that small towns never forget, but rarely speak about openly. Children dared each other to walk past the house at night. Teenagers told embellished versions of the tale around campfires. Adults changed the subject when visitors asked too many questions about what had happened to the family that had vanished during dinner. The story might have remained a local legend, whispered about but never solved, if not for what happened 51 years later. In the autumn of 2018, contractors renovating the house at 227 Maple Grove Avenue made a discovery that would reopen the case and reveal a truth more chilling than any of the theories that had been proposed in the decades since that October evening. Hidden behind a false wall in the basement, sealed in a space so small and carefully concealed that it had escaped detection during the original investigation, they found a metal box. Inside the box was a single item, a reel-to-reel tape recorder, its microphone cord neatly wound, its recording tape still threaded and ready to play. On the tape's label, written in careful block letters, were 4 words that would change everything. The truth about dinner. October 23, 2018, Oakwood Heights, Pennsylvania. The discovery came on a Tuesday morning when the sledgehammer broke through what contractor Jake Brennan had assumed was a solid foundation wall. Instead of concrete and rebar, the tool punched through into empty space, sending a shower of debris cascading into a hidden cavity that exhaled the stale breath of 5 decades. Jake, grandson of the same Dr. Brennan who had comforted Eleanor Hartwell on that terrible night in 1967, stepped back from the hole he'd accidentally created, his breathing echoing strangely in the basement of 20. Dust motes danced in the beam of his work light, and something about the silence that followed the sledgehammer's impact felt wrong, as if the house itself was holding its breath. "Tommy," Jake called to his partner, who was upstairs replacing rotted floorboards in what had once been Vivian Hartwell's bedroom. "You need to see this." Tommy Vasquez, a stocky man in his 50s who had been renovating houses in Oakwood Heights since before Jake was born, descended the basement stairs with the measured gait of someone who had learned that construction projects always held surprises, though none quite like this one. "What'd you find?" Tommy asked, then stopped short when he saw the jagged opening in the wall. "Jesus, Jake, that's not supposed to be there." The two men widened the hole carefully, using a smaller hammer and chisel to avoid damaging whatever lay beyond. As the opening grew, their flashlight beams revealed a space roughly 4 feet wide, 3 feet deep, and 5 feet high, just large enough for a person to crawl inside, though why anyone would want to was another question entirely. It was Tommy who spotted the metal box first, a dull gray rectangle sitting in the far corner of the hidden space like a patient sentinel. Unlike everything else in the basement, the box showed no signs of rust or decay. Its surface was smooth, almost pristine, as if it had been placed there yesterday rather than decades ago. "Should we call someone?" Jake asked, though even as he spoke, he was already reaching for the box. There was something compelling about it, something that demanded to be opened and examined. The box was heavier than it looked, and when Jake lifted it, they could both hear something shifting inside. Not the rattle of loose objects, but the solid weight of equipment settling into place. On the top of the box, etched into the metal with what looked like a sharp tool, were those 4 words that would change everything anyone thought they knew about the Hartwell family disappearance. "The truth about dinner." Tommy and Jake exchanged glances. Both men had grown up in Oakwood Heights. Both knew the story of the family that had vanished during their evening meal, though, like most locals, they spoke of it only in whispers, if at all. The case had become part of the town's folklore, a ghost story told to frightened children, and a cautionary tale about the inexplicable nature of the world. "We should definitely call someone," Tommy said, though his voice lacked conviction. "The police, maybe, or, I don't know, someone official." But Jake was already working at the box's latches. They were simple mechanisms designed to keep the contents secure, but not locked away permanently. With a soft click, the first latch released, followed by the second. Inside, nestled in foam padding that looked far more modern than anything from 1967, was a reel-to-reel tape recorder. It was an expensive model, the kind that serious audio enthusiasts used for professional recordings. Beside it lay a set of headphones, a power cord, and a single reel of tape already threaded through the machine's mechanisms. Tommy reached for his phone. "I'm calling Detective Rodriguez. She needs to know about this." Detective Carmen Rodriguez had been with the Oakwood Heights Police Department for 8 years, but she had never encountered anything quite like the call she received that Tuesday morning. The Hartwell case was legendary within the department, a file that had been passed down through 3 generations of police chiefs like a cursed heirloom. Every officer who had worked the case had retired carrying questions they couldn't answer. She arrived at 2047 Maple Grove Avenue within 20 minutes, accompanied by Officer Dylan Park and a crime scene photographer named Beth Kowalski, the great-niece of the police chief who had originally investigated the disappearance. The connections and coincidences that seemed to swirl around the Hartwell case had always unsettled those who encountered it, as if the mystery possessed a gravity that pulled people into its orbit across generations. "Nobody touches anything else," Detective Rodriguez instructed as she surveyed the basement. "I want photos of everything, the hidden space, the box, the contents, all of it. Then we are taking this back to the station and doing this by the book." But even as she spoke, Rodriguez felt the same inexplicable pull that had affected Jake and Tommy. The tape recorder seemed to exert a magnetic force, demanding attention, promising answers to questions that had haunted the town for half a century. The evidence was photographed, catalogued, and transported to the police station with the kind of meticulous care usually reserved for fresh crime scenes. But this wasn't fresh. It was older than most of the people handling it. Yet somehow it felt more urgent than any case Rodriguez had ever worked. That evening in the department's conference room, Detective Rodriguez sat alone with the tape recorder. She had sent Officer Park home, dismissed the photographer, and informed Chief Patricia Manning that she would be working late. Some instinct told her that whatever was on that tape should be heard in private first, before it became part of the official record. The machine was heavier than modern recording equipment, built in an era when electronics were constructed to last. Rodriguez found the power switch and was surprised when the device hummed to life immediately, its mechanisms moving with the smooth precision of well-maintained machinery. She placed the headphones over her ears and pressed the play button. For the first few seconds, there was nothing but the soft hiss of blank tape. Then, clear as if he was sitting beside her, came the voice of Raymond Hartwell. October 15th, 1967, 6:30 p.m. My name is Raymond Charles Hartwell, and if someone is listening to this recording, it means that what I fear might happen has already occurred. I pray to God that I'm wrong, but I have reason to believe that my family and I are in terrible danger. Rodriguez felt her hands begin to tremble. The voice was calm, methodical, the voice of an accountant accustomed to dealing with facts and figures, not drama or emotion. But beneath the surface composure, she could hear something else, barely controlled terror. I need to explain what's been happening in Oakwood Heights, what I have discovered about our town and why I believe we are all living a lie. 3 weeks ago, I was working late at the office when I noticed something strange about the Henderson account. Miss Henderson has been my client for 7 years, and I know her finances better than she does. But according to the records I was reviewing, she had made a payment to a company I'd never heard of, Millfield Research Associates. Rodriguez paused the tape and made a note. Millfield, the same forest where Timothy had seen strange lights the night before his disappearance, where search teams had combed every inch, looking for the missing family. Raymond's voice paused, and Rodriguez could hear him taking a shaky breath. I might have dismissed it as a simple case of forgetfulness, but then I started looking more carefully at my other clients' accounts. What I found, God help me, what I found was impossible. Over the past 18 months, nearly every person in Oakwood Heights has made at least one payment to Millfield Research Associates. Payments they don't remember making. Payments for services they can't identify. And the amounts, they are not random. They are calculated based on each family's income, their assets, their financial capacity. Someone has been systematically extracting money from this entire town, and the residents don't even know it's happening. Rodriguez felt a chill run down her spine. She was hearing the voice of a dead man, or at least a missing man, revealing a conspiracy that should have been impossible to hide for 50 years. I went to Chief Kowalski yesterday, showed him the evidence. He listened politely, took notes, and promised to look into it. But when I called his office this morning to follow up, his secretary told me there was no record of our meeting, no notes in his file. It was as if our conversation had never happened. I have been doing research at the county courthouse, trying to learn more about Millfield Research Associates. What I discovered is that the company was incorporated in 1949, just 2 years after something very strange happened in our town. Rodriguez found herself holding her breath. The implications of what she was hearing were staggering. I think Millfield Research Associates isn't just taking our money. I think they are taking our memories, our identities, our very existence. And I think they have been doing it for 20 years, systematically erasing people from Oakwood Heights and replacing them with something else, something that looks like us, acts like us, but isn't us. The recording paused again, and Rodriguez could hear muffled voices in the background. Eleanor calling the family to dinner, the children responding with their usual enthusiasm. Normal sounds of a normal family on what they thought was a normal evening. If something happens to us tonight, Raymond continued, his voice barely above a whisper, if we disappear like the others, I want people to know the truth. Eleanor doesn't believe me. She thinks I'm working too hard, imagining conspiracies where none exist. The children don't know anything about this. They are innocent. But I have seen too much, learned too much, and I think they know that I know. The tape went silent for nearly a minute. broken only by the sound of Raymond's increasingly agitated breathing. There are others working with them. People in town who aren't what they seem. I have been watching, taking notes, trying to identify them. Mrs. Chen from the garden club. I have seen her talking to men in suits who park their car just outside the city limits. Brennan, who's been our family physician for years. Last week I caught him making notes in a file that had nothing to do with medical records. Even some of the police officers. I think Chief Kowalski might be one of them. That would explain why he has no memory of our conversation. Rodriguez felt her blood turn to ice. Dr. Brennan had been the first neighbor to respond to Eleanor's screams that night. He had comforted her, helped coordinate the search efforts, been a pillar of support during the investigation. If Raymond's suspicions were correct, "I'm going to hide this recording before dinner," Raymond continued. "If nothing happens, if I'm wrong about tonight, I will retrieve it tomorrow and destroy it. But if we disappear, if they take us like they have taken the others, maybe someday someone will find this and understand what really happened to Oakwood Heights." The recording ended abruptly, leaving Rodriguez sitting in the silent conference room with her mind reeling. She rewound the tape and listened to it again, taking detailed notes, trying to process the implications of what she'd heard. If Raymond Hartwell was telling the truth, if his fears had been justified, then the disappearance of his family wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern, a systematic operation that had been ongoing for decades. And if that was true, then everyone who had investigated the original case, everyone who had tried to help, might have been compromised from the beginning. Rodriguez spent the rest of the night researching, using the department's computer system to access historical records, census data, and archived newspaper files. What she found confirmed her worst fears. The population discrepancies Raymond had mentioned were real. Between 1947 and 1950, Oakwood Heights had indeed lost nearly a quarter of its residents, with no documentation of deaths, relocations, or any other explanation for their absence. Even more disturbing, similar population drops had occurred every few years since then, always small enough to avoid attention but consistent enough to suggest a pattern. She pulled the original case files from the Hartwell investigation, reading through decades-old reports with new eyes, now that she knew what to look for. Inconsistencies jumped out at her, witness statements that contradicted each other, evidence that had mysteriously disappeared from storage, investigators who had been reassigned to other cases, just as they seemed to be making progress. Most chilling of all was a notation she found in Chief Kowalski's personal file, a memo dated 3 days after the Hartwell disappearance that simply read, "Case closed. No further investigation required. File in archives." The memo was signed, but not by Chief Kowalski. It was signed by someone identified only as MRA Supervisor, Millfield Research Associates. As dawn broke over Oakwood Heights, Detective Rodriguez sat surrounded by evidence of a conspiracy that stretched back 70 years. A conspiracy that had successfully hidden in plain sight, protected by the very people who should have been investigating it. But now she had Raymond Hartwell's tape. She had proof that at least one person had understood what was happening and had tried to warn others. The question was, what should she do with that knowledge? Her first instinct was to call her supervisor, to bring in state authorities, to expose everything. But Raymond's recording had made one thing clear. The conspiracy had roots deep within the town's power structure. How could she know who to trust? As she sat contemplating her next move, Rodriguez became aware of a sound that shouldn't have been there. A low humming, almost like the refrigerator motor, but deeper, more resonant. The same sound Eleanor Hartwell had described hearing just before her family vanished. The detective looked around the empty conference room, her heart beginning to race. The humming seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, vibrating through the walls and floorboards with an intensity that made her teeth ache. Outside the window, the first rays of sunlight were painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. But the light looked wrong somehow, too bright, too sharp, as if it were being filtered through something that wasn't quite glass. Rodriguez reached for her service weapon, though she had no idea what she intended to shoot. The humming grew louder, and now it was accompanied by that same smell Eleanor had described. Ozone and metal and something chemical. The conference room door, which she was certain she had locked, stood slightly ajar. Through the gap she could see a figure standing in the hallway. A man in a grey suit, his face obscured by shadows, holding what looked like a clipboard. He was perfectly still, perfectly patient, as if he had been waiting there all night. Detective Carmen Rodriguez had spent 8 years in law enforcement. She had faced down armed suspects, investigated brutal crimes, and never once considered backing down from a fight. But as she stared at the figure in the hallway, every instinct she possessed screamed at her to run. Instead, she did something that would prove to be either very brave or very foolish. She grabbed the tape recorder, tucked it under her arm, and headed for the back exit of the police station. Behind her she could hear footsteps, measured, unhurried, but gaining ground with each step. The humming sound followed her, growing stronger, and she realized with growing horror that whatever had taken the Hartwell family 51 years ago had come for her as well. But Detective Rodriguez had one advantage that Raymond Hartwell hadn't possessed. She knew she was being hunted. The question was whether that knowledge would be enough to save her. October 24, 2008. Detective Carmen Rodriguez had been running for 6 hours. The October morning was crisp and clear, but the world around her had taken on a surreal quality that made her question everything she thought she knew about reality. The familiar streets of Oakwood Heights seemed subtly wrong. Houses that she remembered being blue were now white. Streetlights that had always stood on the left side of the road now loomed on the right, and the faces of people she passed held expressions of blank confusion, as if they were trying to remember something important that remained just out of reach. The tape recorder felt like it weighed 100 pounds, but she clutched it against her chest like a lifeline. It was the only proof she had of the conspiracy that had been devouring her town for 7 decades, and she was determined to protect it even if it cost her life. Behind her, always exactly 3 blocks away, no matter how fast she ran or which direction she turned, the figure in the grey suit continued his patient pursuit. He never seemed to hurry, never appeared to exert any effort, but somehow he was always there when she looked back, clipboard in hand, waiting with the infinite patience of something that had all the time in the world. Rodriguez had tried calling for backup on her radio, but the only response was static. Her cell phone showed no signal, though she was in the heart of town where coverage had never been a problem. Even more disturbing, when she tried to flag down passing cars, the drivers looked right through her as if she didn't exist. She was being erased, just like the Hartwell family. Just like the 900 residents who had vanished between 1947 and 1950, just like countless others over the decades who had been systematically removed from existence by an organization that operated with surgical precision and unlimited resources. But Rodriguez had advantages that previous victims hadn't possessed. She knew what was happening to her. She understood the scope of the conspiracy, and most importantly, she had Raymond Hartwell's recording proof that could expose everything if she could just find a way to get it to the right people. The question was, who were the right people? If Millfield Research Associates had been operating in Oakwood Heights for 70 years, how deep did their influence extend? How many police departments, government agencies, and media outlets were compromised? As she ran, Rodriguez found herself heading toward the outskirts of town, driven by an instinct she couldn't quite explain. The houses grew sparser, the streets narrower, until she was moving through the wooded area that bordered Millfield Forest, the same forest where Timothy Hartwell had seen strange lights the night before his family disappeared. It was there, hidden among the trees like a cancer growing in healthy tissue, that she found it. The Millfield Research Associates facility wasn't marked with any signs or identifying features. From the outside, It looked like nothing more than a large, windowless warehouse surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. But as Rodriguez crouched behind a cluster of oak trees, studying the building through the morning mist, she could see details that marked it as something far more sophisticated than a simple storage facility. The fence was electrified, its wires humming with the same low-frequency sound she had heard in the police station. Cameras mounted on poles tracked back and forth with mechanical precision, scanning for intruders, and parked in the lot behind the building were dozens of identical gray sedans, their license plates bearing numbers rather than the standard letter-number combinations used by the state. Most telling of all were the people moving in and out of the facility. Men and women in gray suits, all carrying clipboards, all moving with the same measured gait she had observed in her pursuer. They looked human from a distance, but there was something subtly wrong about their movements, as if they were performing an elaborate imitation of human behavior rather than acting naturally. Rodriguez activated the voice recorder function on her phone, hoping that even if she didn't survive the next few hours, someone might eventually find her device and learn what she had discovered. This is Detective Carmen Rodriguez, badge number 4427, Oakwood Heights Police Department. The date is October 24th. I'm recording this from a position overlooking the Millfield Research Associates facility, located approximately 3 miles northeast of downtown Oakwood Heights. She paused, watching as 2 figures in gray suits emerged from the building carrying what looked like electronic equipment. I have evidence that this organization has been systematically abducting and erasing residents of Oakwood Heights since at least 1947. The evidence includes a recording made by Raymond Hartwell on October 15, 1967, just hours before his family disappeared. Hartwell had discovered financial irregularities, suggesting that MRA was extracting money from town residents without their knowledge, and he believed the organization was capable of manipulating or erasing human memories. A branch snapped behind her. Rodriguez spun around to find the man in the gray suit standing 10 feet away, clipboard held at the ready, his face expressionless. Up close, she could see that his features were perfectly symmetrical in a way that real human faces never were, and his eyes held no warmth, no recognition, no spark of genuine consciousness. "Detective Rodriguez," he said in a voice that was pleasant and professional, and completely devoid of emotion. "You have been selected for processing. Please accompany me to the facility." "Processing?" Rodriguez asked, keeping her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "Is that what you call it when you erase people from existence?" The figure tilted his head slightly, as if considering her question with mild academic interest. "Erasure is an inaccurate term. We prefer optimization. Oakwood Heights serves as a controlled environment for studying human behavioral patterns and social dynamics. Occasionally, subjects who develop awareness of the study parameters must be removed to preserve the integrity of the research." Rodriguez felt her blood turn to ice. "Research? You are talking about people's lives. Families, children, subjects," the figure corrected. "The distinction is important for maintaining proper scientific objectivity. The Hartwell Family Unit, for example, provided valuable data regarding family cohesion under stress conditions. Subject Raymond's discovery of our financial monitoring systems created an excellent opportunity to observe how families respond to existential threats." The casual way he discussed the Hartwell family's terror and disappearance made Rodriguez sick to her stomach. "What did you do to them? Where are they?" The adult subjects were processed according to standard protocols. Their consciousness patterns were archived for future analysis, and their physical forms were recycled. The juvenile subjects proved more interesting. Subject Timothy's observational capabilities and Subject Vivian's social adaptability made them suitable for integration into other research populations. Rodriguez stared at him in horror. "You killed them. You killed Raymond and Eleanor, and did something to their children." Death is another inaccurate term. Consciousness termination followed by data preservation is more precise. As for the juvenile subjects, they were relocated to similar research environments where their development could continue under controlled conditions. Subject Timothy is currently designated as Research Unit 7049 at our facility in Vermont. Subject Vivian became Research Unit 2156 at our Colorado installation. The revelation hit Rodriguez like a physical blow. Timothy and Vivian Hartwell were still alive, somewhere 51 years after their disappearance, but they weren't living as children anymore. They had been raised in captivity, studied like laboratory animals, their entire lives shaped by the same organization that had murdered their parents. "Why?" Rodriguez whispered. "Why would you do this to people?" "Humanity is inefficient," the figure replied matter-of-factly. "Your species wastes enormous resources on emotional responses, irrational behaviors, and counterproductive social structures. Our research is designed to identify optimal patterns of human organization that can be implemented on a larger scale. Oakwood Heights represents a successful 70-year study in population management and behavioral control." Rodriguez looked around at the forest, the facility, the town beyond the trees. "The whole town is your laboratory." "Correct. We maintain approximately 3,000 human subjects in a controlled environment, introducing variables as needed to study responses to social, economic, and psychological stimuli. Subjects who develop awareness of the artificial nature of their environment are processed and replaced with more compliant alternatives." "Replaced with what?" "Biological automatons, based on archived consciousness patterns. They maintain the appearance and basic behavioral characteristics of the original subjects, while lacking the capacity for independent thought or discovery. Very efficient for maintaining population stability." The implications were staggering. Rodriguez realized that many of the people she had known her entire life, colleagues, neighbors, friends, might not be human at all. They might be artificial constructs designed to maintain the illusion of a normal town, while the real residence was systematically harvested for research purposes. "How many facilities like this do you operate?" she asked. "Currently, 247 research installations across North America, with additional sites in Europe and Asia. The Oakwood Heights model has proven highly successful and is being expanded to accommodate larger population samples." Rodriguez felt the full scope of the conspiracy settling over her like a suffocating blanket. This wasn't just about one missing family or one small town. It was a massive, international operation that had been studying and manipulating human populations for decades, possibly centuries. "What happens to me now?" she asked. "Standard processing, consciousness archival, data extraction, physical recycling. You will be replaced with a compliant alternative that will continue your duties without the inconvenient tendency toward independent investigation. The transition should be seamless to outside observers." Rodriguez looked down at the tape recorder still clutched in her hands. Raymond Hartwell's voice, his desperate attempt to warn the world about what was happening to his town, represented the only hope of exposing the truth. But if she was processed, if her replacement simply filed the recorder as evidence and forgot about it, then Raymond's sacrifice would be meaningless. "I have one request," she said, surprising herself with how calm her voice sounded. "Requests are not typically accommodated during processing. I want to hear the rest of Raymond Hartwell's recording. You said his family provided valuable research data. I'm curious about the specific behavioral patterns you observed." The figure considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Educational value for current subjects is considered beneficial. The request is approved." Rodriguez rewound the tape to a section she hadn't had time to examine during her frantic escape from the police station. Raymond's voice filled the forest clearing, but this time he sounded different, more frightened, more desperate. "It's 7:45 p.m. now. We finished dinner 20 minutes ago, but something's wrong. Eleanor keeps forgetting things. She asked me 3 times if I wanted coffee, and she doesn't remember making the pot roast even though she spent all afternoon cooking it. The children are acting strange too. Vivian keeps staring at the wall like she's watching something that isn't there, and Timothy is reading the same page of his book over and over again without turning it." Rodriguez felt her heart pounding, as she listened to Raymond describe the early stages of whatever process had ultimately erased his family. "I think they are doing something to us right now. Some kind of procedure. I can hear that humming sound getting louder, and there's a smell in the air like burning metal." Eleanor asked me who I was a few minutes ago. She looked right at me, her husband of 12 years, and didn't recognize me. The recording paused, and when Raymond spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "I can see them now. 3 figures in gray suits standing in our backyard, just watching the house. They have equipment with them. Machines I don't recognize, and the humming. God, the humming is so loud now I can barely think. Eleanor and the children don't seem to hear it at all. They are just sitting in the living room staring at nothing, like they are waiting for something to happen." Rodriguez looked up at the figure standing over her. "You were there that night? You watched it happen?" "I was designated as primary observer for the Hartwell processing operation. The family unit demonstrated exceptional resistance to standard memory modification protocols, requiring the implementation of more intensive procedures." "More intensive procedures," Rodriguez repeated. "You mean torture, consciousness restructuring?" The subject's awareness of the research environment created psychological barriers that prevented proper integration. Complete consciousness termination became necessary to preserve operational security. The tape continued, and Raymond's voice became increasingly fragmented and confused. "Eleanor keeps asking who she is. She doesn't remember her name, doesn't remember the children. Vivian is crying, but she doesn't know why." Timothy threw his book across the room and said, "The words don't make sense anymore. Nothing makes sense anymore. I can feel my own memories slipping away, like trying to hold water in my hands. I know I should be afraid, but I can't remember why. Can't remember what was I talking about. Who am I? Why am I making this recording?" The final section of the tape was heartbreaking. Rodriguez listened as Raymond Hartwell, a man who had discovered a conspiracy that threatened his entire community, slowly lost his ability to understand what was happening to him. His voice became childlike, confused, desperate. "The people in gray suits are in the house now. They are being very nice, very gentle. They say they are going to help us, take us somewhere safe." Eleanor seems happy about that. The children are smiling. I think I should be happy too, but there's something I'm supposed to remember, something important. But I can't. The recording ended with the sound of footsteps and a door closing. Subject Raymond's consciousness degradation proceeded according to expected parameters, the figure commented. The family unit was successfully extracted at 8:23 p.m., with minimal disruption to neighboring subjects. Rodriguez felt tears streaming down her face. She had listened to a family's final moments, heard them lose themselves piece by piece, until they were no longer capable of understanding their own destruction. "You monsters," she whispered. "How can you do this to people?" "Emotion is inefficient," the figure replied. "Your distress serves no productive purpose and will be eliminated during processing." Rodriguez looked down at the tape recorder one more time, then made a decision that would either save her life or ensure her destruction. Instead of handing over the device as expected, she hurled it as hard as she could toward the electrified fence surrounding the facility. The recorder struck the fence with a shower of sparks and a sound like thunder. Alarms began blaring from the facility, and Rodriguez could see figures in gray suits pouring out of the building, moving with sudden urgency toward their position. "Unacceptable behavior," the figure said, his pleasant demeanor finally cracking to reveal something cold and mechanical underneath. "Emergency processing protocols are now in effect." Rodriguez ran. She crashed through the forest undergrowth, branches tearing at her clothes and face. But she didn't stop. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of pursuit, not just footsteps, but the whine of machinery, the buzz of drones, the mechanical chatter of equipment she couldn't identify. But she had accomplished something crucial. The tape recorder lay somewhere in the electrified fence system, its contents potentially recoverable by anyone who knew what to look for. If she didn't survive, if she was processed and replaced like so many others, at least Raymond Hartwell's final message might still reach the outside world. Rodriguez burst from the tree line onto Highway 84, the main road leading out of Oakwood Heights. For the first time in hours, she felt a spark of hope. If she could reach the state police barracks 20 miles away, if she could convince someone in authority to investigate the facility, maybe the 70-year nightmare could finally end. A car was approaching from the south, a silver sedan with government plates. Rodriguez waved frantically, stepping into the road to flag it down. The vehicle slowed and stopped, and a woman in a dark suit got out. "Detective Rodriguez?" the woman asked. "I'm Agent Sarah Mitchell, Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have been looking for you." Rodriguez nearly collapsed with relief. "Thank God. I have evidence of a massive conspiracy. There's a facility in the woods, run by something called Millfield Research Associates. They have been abducting people, conducting experiments on the entire town." Agent Mitchell nodded sympathetically. "We know, Detective. We have been investigating MRA for several months now. Why don't you get in the car and we can discuss this at our field office?" Rodriguez hesitated. Something about the woman's tone, her posture, the way she held herself felt familiar. "Wrong. What field office?" Rodriguez asked. "The nearest FBI office is in Pittsburgh, 90 miles from here." Agent Mitchell smiled, and her expression was perfectly pleasant and completely emotionless. "The mobile field office, Detective. We have established a temporary command post, specifically for this investigation." Rodriguez looked more closely at the woman's suit. It was gray. "You are one of them," Rodriguez whispered, backing away from the car. "Please don't make this more difficult than necessary. Detective, your processing has already been scheduled, and delays disrupt the efficiency of the operation." Rodriguez turned and ran again, but this time she knew it was hopeless. The road stretched ahead of her with no cover, no place to hide. More vehicles were approaching from both directions, gray sedans with government plates and passengers in gray suits. She was surrounded. As the cars closed in, Rodriguez thought about Raymond Hartwell's final recording, about Timothy and Vivian still alive somewhere in captivity, about the thousands of people who had been erased from existence to feed an organization's insatiable hunger for data and control. She thought about her own replacement, who would return to the Oakwood Heights Police Department tomorrow morning and file the tape recorder case as unsolved, another mystery lost to bureaucratic indifference. But most of all, she thought about the 8047 facilities that the figure had mentioned. Installations across North America and beyond, each one maintaining its own population of human subjects, each one conducting its own experiments in behavioral control and consciousness manipulation. The cars stopped, and figures in gray suits began walking toward her with measured, patient steps. Rodriguez had nowhere left to run, nowhere left to hide, but she had one final card to play. Before joining the police force, Carmen Rodriguez had been a journalism major at Penn State. She had learned about dead man switches, about insurance policies, about ways to ensure that important information reached the public, even if something happened to the person who discovered it. 3 days ago, before she had ever heard Raymond Hartwell's name or learned about Millfield Research Associates, she had received an email from her college roommate asking about a story she was investigating for the Washington Post. Rodriguez had replied with routine police department information, but she had also set up an automated email system that would send her roommate a detailed message if Rodriguez failed to check in every 20. That email was scheduled to be sent in 6 hours. It would contain everything Rodriguez had learned about the Oakwood Heights conspiracy, including GPS coordinates for the facility, descriptions of the figures in gray suits, and explicit instructions to contact the United Nations Human Rights Commission, rather than any U.S. government agencies that might be compromised. "Detective Rodriguez," the lead figure said as they formed a circle around her, Your continued resistance is noted and will be factored into our behavioral analysis data. Please prepare for consciousness extraction." Rodriguez smiled, and for the first time in hours, she felt genuinely happy. "Extract this," she said, and told them about the email. The figures exchanged glances, the first genuine emotion she had seen from any of them. For a moment, their perfect composure cracked, revealing something that might have been concern or even fear. "Containment breach," one of them said into a device that looked like a combination cell phone and medical scanner. "Code 7 protocols required. Request immediate consultation with primary directive authority." Rodriguez was placed in the back of one of the gray sedans, but instead of being taken to the facility for processing, she found herself being driven toward downtown Oakwood Heights. The figures seemed to be arguing among themselves in voices too low for her to hear, consulting their devices and clipboards with increasing frequency. They stopped at the police station where Rodriguez's nightmare had begun less than 24 hours earlier. But instead of taking her inside, they waited in the parking lot as if expecting someone. That someone arrived in a black limousine that looked like it had driven straight out of a government motorcade. The figure who emerged was different from the others. Older, more human in appearance, wearing an expensive suit instead of the standard gray uniform. He approached Rodriguez's car and tapped on the window. When it rolled down, he leaned in and studied her with eyes that held genuine intelligence and what might have been respect. "Detective Rodriguez," he said in a voice that carried the weight of absolute authority. "My name is Director Holloway. I believe we need to have a conversation." October 25th, 2018. Location unknown. Rodriguez woke up in a room that looked like a cross between a hospital and a luxury hotel. The walls were white, the furniture expensive but sterile, and there were no windows to indicate where she might be. Her phone, her service weapon, and all of her personal belongings were gone, but she was unharmed and wearing clean clothes. Director Holloway sat in a chair beside her bed, reading from a tablet computer. When he saw that she was awake, he set the device aside and regarded her with the same mixture of intelligence and respect she had noticed the night before. "Good morning, Detective. I trust you slept well." "Where am I?" "A secure facility approximately 200 miles from Oakwood Heights. Please don't concern yourself with the exact location. It's not relevant to our discussion." Rodriguez sat up in the bed, her mind immediately racing through potential escape scenarios. "Are you going to kill me?" "Kill you?" Director Holloway seemed genuinely surprised by the question. "Detective, I'm hoping to offer you a job." The response was so unexpected that Rodriguez was momentarily speechless. "You have demonstrated exceptional investigative skills," Holloway continued. "Your discovery of Raymond Hartwell's recording, your analysis of the historical data, your deduction of our operational parameters, all of it shows exactly the kind of analytical thinking we value. You value it so much that you are planning to erase my consciousness and replace me with a robot. Standard field units lack the authority to make recruitment decisions. They were following established protocols for containing security breaches, but your email insurance policy changed the parameters significantly." Rodriguez felt a chill of understanding. "You intercepted the email." "Of course. We have been monitoring electronic communications in the Oakwood Heights area for decades. But the very fact that you anticipated that possibility and planned accordingly demonstrates the kind of strategic thinking we need." "For doing what, exactly?" Director Holloway stood and walked to a wall display that lit up at his approach. It showed a map of the world dotted with hundreds of red points. Each of those markers represents a research installation similar to the one you discovered. We currently monitor approximately 2.3 million human subjects across 47 facilities worldwide. The data we collect allows us to predict and control social behaviors on a scale that no government or corporation has ever achieved. You are talking about mass manipulation, mind control. We prefer behavioral optimization, and it's not as sinister as you make it sound. Our research has prevented 3 wars, eliminated poverty in 17 test regions, and reduced violent crime by 73% in monitored population. We are creating a better world. Detective, one carefully controlled experiment at a time. Rodriguez stared at the map, trying to process the scope of what she was seeing. And you want me to help you do this? I want you to help us do it better. Your investigation revealed several inefficiencies in our Oakwood Heights operation that we hadn't previously identified. If you had been in charge of that facility, Raymond Hartwell would never have discovered our financial monitoring systems. His family would still be alive and contributing valuable behavioral data. The casual way he discussed the Hartwell family's death made Rodriguez's stomach turn. They are not data points. They were human beings with lives and hopes and dreams. Human beings whose lives and hopes and dreams contributed to research that will improve the lives of millions of others. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Detective, I thought a law enforcement officer would understand that principle. Rodriguez stood up, pacing to the far side of the room. What happened to the real Director Holloway? The psychiatrist who evaluated Eleanor Hartwell in... The man smiled. Very good, detective. You noticed the name connection. Dr. Marcus Holloway was recruited to our organization in 1971. 4 years after the Hartwell incident, he proved quite valuable in developing psychological assessment protocols for potential subjects. I took his identity when he died and now you are offering me the same deal. Join you or be processed. I'm offering you the opportunity to shape the future of human civilization. To be part of something larger than local law enforcement, larger than individual concerns, larger than the inefficient chaos that currently passes for human society. Rodriguez looked at the world map again, at all those red dots representing facilities where people were being studied and manipulated and erased. What if I say no? She asked. Then you will be returned to Oakwood Heights with modified memories. You will file the tape recorder as evidence in an unsolved case, and you will continue your career with no knowledge of this conversation or anything you have learned about our operations. And if I say yes? Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, considering her options. Finally, she turned to face Director Holloway. I need to know what happened to Raymond Hartwell's consciousness. You said it was archived. I want to talk to him. Holloway raised an eyebrow. That's unusual, but not impossible. May I ask why? Director Holloway nodded slowly. Very well. It will take some time to prepare the interface systems, but it can be arranged. October 26, 2018. Location unknown. The consciousness interface looked like something out of a science fiction movie. A chair surrounded by screens and sensors, connected to banks of computers that hummed with electronic activity. Rodriguez had been given a brief orientation on how the system worked, though she suspected she was only receiving the most basic explanation. Subject Raymond Hartwell, archived October 15, 1967. The technician announced as the screens flickered to life. Consciousness pattern fully intact, ready for interaction. At first, there was nothing but static on the displays. Then, gradually, an image began to form, not Raymond as he had appeared in life, but a shifting, abstract representation of thought patterns and memory fragments. When he spoke, his voice came from speakers around the room, layered with electronic distortion but still recognizably human. Hello? Raymond's consciousness said, confusion evident in his digitized voice. Where am I? What happened to my family? Rodriguez leaned forward in her chair. Mr. Hartwell, my name is Detective Carmen Rodriguez. I found your recording, the one you hid before they took you. Recording? The abstract patterns on the screen shifted and swirled. I remember making a recording about the financial irregularities, about Millfield Research Associates. Did someone hear it? Did someone find out the truth? Yes, Rodriguez said gently. I heard it. I know what they did to you and your family. Eleanor, Vivian, Timothy. Raymond's voice broke with digital static that sounded terrifyingly like electronic sobs. Are they here too, in this place? Rodriguez looked at Director Holloway, who was observing the interaction with clinical interest. Tell me about the children, Timothy and Vivian. Are they still alive? Alive is a subjective term, Holloway replied. Their bodies are healthy and well-maintained. Their minds have been shaped by decades of controlled environment conditioning. They function. They respond to stimuli. They even express preferences and form relationships within their assigned parameters. Whether that constitutes life in any meaningful sense is a philosophical question. I want to see them, Rodriguez said. That would require travel to other facilities. Timothy, Research Unit 7049 is currently at our installation in Vermont. Vivian, Research Unit 2156 is in Colorado. Both requests would need to be approved by... No, Rodriguez interrupted. I don't want to see the research units. I want to talk to their archived consciousnesses. Timothy and Vivian Hartwell, aged 11 and 15, archived October. Holloway looked uncomfortable for the first time since Rodriguez had met him. The juvenile subjects, their consciousness patterns were more extensively modified during archival. The results may not be what you expect. Show me. 20 minutes later, Rodriguez was listening to the electronic voices of two children who had been murdered 51 years ago, but who somehow still existed in the digital realm of archived memories and preserved thought patterns. Timothy's consciousness was more intact, probably because his 11-year-old mind had been less complex to begin with. He spoke with the same curious enthusiasm she had heard in Raymond's recording, asking questions about where he was and whether his Hardy Boys books were nearby. Vivian's patterns were more fragmented. Her teenage mind had been developing rapidly when it was archived, and the preservation process had captured her in a state of constant flux. She kept asking about the homecoming dance, about whether Tommy Richardson had called, about whether her parents were angry with her for something she couldn't quite remember. Most heartbreaking of all was their reaction when Rodriguez told them about their father's consciousness. Dad's here too? Timothy asked excitedly. Can we see him? Can we go home now? We were supposed to have apple pie, Vivian added, her voice wavering with digital confusion. Mom was making apple pie for dessert. Did we miss dinner? Rodriguez felt tears streaming down her face as she listened to the electronic ghosts of two children who had been trapped in their final moments for over half a century. They were aware. They were conscious. They could think and feel and remember, but they were forever frozen in the instant before their world was torn apart. This is what you are offering me, Rodriguez said to Director Holloway after the consciousness interface was shut down. The chance to do this to hundreds of thousands more people. The chance to contribute to research that will ultimately benefit all of humanity, Holloway corrected. Individual sacrifices in service of a greater good. Rodriguez stood up from the interface chair, her decision finally made. I will take the job, she said. November 15, 2018. Millfield Research Associates North American Command Center. Detective Carmen Rodriguez, now Director Rodriguez, stood in her new office overlooking a sprawling complex of buildings that housed the administrative center for MRA's North American operations. In 3 weeks, she had learned more about large-scale human behavior modification than she had thought possible, and she was beginning to understand the true scope of the organization she had joined. The work was fascinating and horrible in equal measure. She had access to decades of research data showing how subtle environmental modifications could influence everything from voting patterns to consumer preferences to marriage compatibility rates. She could see the careful orchestration behind social trends that most people assumed were organic developments. More disturbing were the operational reports from facilities around the world. Monthly processing quotas, efficiency metrics for consciousness archival, cost-benefit analyses of different subject selection methodologies. Human beings reduced to statistics and data points in spreadsheets that tracked the systematic destruction of lives with bureaucratic precision. But Rodriguez had not accepted the position to become a more efficient monster. She had accepted it because it was the only way to accomplish what she really intended to do. Her computer chimed with an incoming message. It was from Dr. Sarah Chen, not the Mrs. Chen from Oakwood Heights, but a computer systems specialist working at the Vermont facility where Timothy Hartwell's research unit was being held. Package delivery confirmed. The message read, "Installation complete and undetected. Activation in 72 hours. Rodriguez deleted the message and returned to her work. On her desk lay detailed personnel files for every researcher, administrator, and field operative working in the North American installations. She had spent weeks identifying individuals who might be sympathetic to her actual goals. People who had joined MRA believing they were contributing to legitimate research, but who were beginning to question the organization's methods. Dr. Chen was one of 17 such people Rodriguez had contacted over the past month. Each had been carefully approached, their concerns validated, their consciences appealed to, and each had been given a specific role to play in what was about to happen. Rodriguez opened her secure communication system and sent a series of coded messages to contacts in 12 different time zones. The responses came back within minutes. London package ready for delivery. Tokyo installation confirmed. Sydney systems prepared. Berlin activation standing by. Across the world, researchers and technicians who had believed they were serving humanity were about to discover the true nature of their work. But more importantly, they were about to help Rodriguez implement a plan that would free every archived consciousness in MRA's global network. At exactly midnight GMT on November 18, 2018, a computer virus that Rodriguez had spent years developing would simultaneously activate in every Millfield Research Associates facility on Earth. The virus was designed to do three things: copy all archived consciousness data to servers controlled by international human rights organizations, transmit detailed documentation of MRA's operations to journalists and government officials worldwide, and then permanently delete all research data while restoring full autonomy to every archived consciousness pattern. It wouldn't bring Raymond, Timothy, and Vivian Hartwell back to life. Nothing could do that. But it would free their digital selves from the electronic prison where they had been trapped for 51 years. They would still exist as consciousness patterns, but they would exist with full knowledge of their situation and the ability to communicate with the outside world. More importantly, the virus would shut down MRA's global operations permanently, releasing hundreds of thousands of current subjects from facilities around the world, and ensuring that no new victims would be processed and archived. Rodriguez had no illusions about what would happen to her when the virus activated. MRA would know immediately who was responsible, and they would take steps to ensure she was processed and erased as thoroughly as possible. But unlike the organization's previous victims, she was going into her fate with full knowledge and by choice. On November 17th, Rodriguez made one final recording of her own. "My name is Carmen Rodriguez, and I was a detective with the Oakwood Heights Police Department until I discovered the truth about what happened to the Hartwell family. If you are listening to this, it means that the global conspiracy known as Millfield Research Associates has been exposed and shut down. It means that hundreds of thousands of people who were being held in research facilities have been freed, and it means that the archived consciousnesses of victims like Raymond, Timothy, and Vivian Hartwell are finally able to tell their own stories. I don't know what form of existence they will have now, or what it means to be a digital consciousness set free from electronic captivity, but I know they are free, and that's what matters." This is Detective Carmen Rodriguez, signing off. The next morning, Rodriguez dressed carefully in her best suit and drove to work for the last time. She spent the day in routine meetings, reviewing operational reports, discussing efficiency improvements with her staff. To all appearances, it was a normal day in the life of a MRA regional director. At 11:59 p.m., she sat in her office and watched the clock tick toward midnight. In research facilities across 6 continents, archived consciousness patterns were about to experience something they thought they would never feel again: freedom. The virus activated exactly on schedule. Within seconds, Alarms were sounding throughout the complex. Computer screens flickered and died. Emergency lighting bathed the corridors in red. And somewhere in the digital realm where electronic souls had been imprisoned for decades, Raymond Hartwell was finally able to complete the warning he had tried to give 51 years earlier. The truth about dinner and everything that came after was finally being told. Epilogue. December 5th. The story broke simultaneously in newspapers around the world. Massive human rights conspiracy exposed. Hundreds of thousands freed from secret research facilities. Digital consciousness revealed decades of systematic abuse. The archived consciousness of Raymond Hartwell became the primary witness in what international prosecutors called the largest human rights case in history. His testimony, along with that of thousands of other digital survivors, provided evidence of systematic abduction, torture, and murder spanning 7 decades. Timothy and Vivian Hartwell, their consciousness patterns, finally free to develop and grow, chose to remain in digital form rather than attempt reconstruction in artificial bodies. They became advocates for other archived consciousnesses, helping them adjust to their new existence and working to ensure that what had happened to them would never happen to anyone else. Carmen Rodriguez was never found. MRA claimed she had been killed during the facility breach, but no body was recovered. Some investigators believed she had been processed and erased in retaliation for her actions. Others suggested she might have escaped and gone into hiding. But late at night, when researchers working with archived consciousness patterns were alone in their laboratories, they sometimes reported hearing a voice they didn't recognize offering advice, providing encouragement, or simply checking to make sure that the digital souls in their care were being treated with dignity and respect. The voice always identified itself the same way. "This is Detective Rodriguez. I'm here to help." In Oakwood Heights, Pennsylvania, the house at 2047 Maple Grove Avenue was purchased by the Hartwell Foundation and converted into a memorial for victims of the MRA conspiracy. Visitors can tour the dining room where a family shared their last meal together, listen to Raymond's original recording, and learn about the investigation that ultimately brought down one of history's most extensive criminal organizations. On the anniversary of the family's disappearance each year, people gather in the house to remember the victims and honor the courage of those who fought to expose the truth. The last entry in Detective Rodriguez's case file was written not by her replacement or by her supervisor, but by the archived consciousness of Raymond Hartwell himself, speaking through the digital interface systems that had once been used to interrogate victims. Case closed. Justice served. The truth has been told, and the dead can finally rest in peace.